Every single day, you pay a price for things. You pay for a loaf of bread, a gallon of gas, or a cup of coffee. The market decides those prices based on how much stuff there is and how many people want to buy it. It makes sense. It is simple. But what if I told you that the most important price in the entire world, the price of money itself, was not decided by a free market at all? Instead, it was decided by a small group of ordinary men sitting in glass offices in London, sending a few quick emails every morning. These men were not economic geniuses. They were just regular office workers. Yet, the numbers they typed into their computers determined the interest rates on your credit cards, your parents' mortgage, your student loans, and even the national debt of entire countries. In total, their daily numbers controlled over $300 trillion. That is $300,000 billion. It is a number so big that it is almost impossible to picture in your head. For decades, the entire global financial system trusted these men to tell the absolute truth. Every morning, they were supposed to answer one simple question: how much does it cost your bank to borrow money today? The average of their answers became a number called LIBOR. It was treated like a holy truth, a financial North Star that everyone relied on. But there was a problem. The number was a complete lie. And the biggest twist of all? They did not construct a massive, complex computer program to pull off this multi-trillion-dollar heist. They did it for something as simple as a free lunch, a bottle of cheap champagne, or a quick favor for a buddy. The entire foundation of global finance was being manipulated by text messages that read like teenagers planning a weekend party. To understand how this happened, we have to look at how banks actually work. Imagine a school playground where kids trade collectible game cards. Every kid wants to have cards, but some kids run out of cards by the end of the day because they traded too many. Other kids have a big stack of extra cards sitting in their backpacks. To make sure everyone can keep playing the next morning, the kids with too many cards lend them to the kids with no cards overnight. The next day, the borrower returns the cards, plus one extra shiny card as a little thank you fee. In the real world, banks do the exact same thing, but with cash. Every single day, billions of dollars move in and out of a bank. People withdraw money from ATMs, swipe their credit cards, and deposit their paychecks. By the time the bank closes its doors at 5 o'clock, it might have too much cash, or it might have too little. To balance their books, banks borrow billions of dollars from each other overnight. Just like the kids on the playground, they pay a small fee to borrow this money. This fee is the interest rate. In London, 16 of the world's biggest banks were chosen to measure this fee. Every morning at 11 o'clock, an independent group would ask each of these 16 banks a simple question. If you had to borrow money from another bank right now, how much interest would you have to pay? The regulators would take the 16 answers, throw out the 4 highest answers, throw out the 4 lowest answers, and average the remaining 8. That final average was LIBOR. It seemed like a robust, fair system. If one bank tried to lie and say the rate was super high or super low, their answer would just be thrown out. The system seemed self-correcting. But here is the second twist. The banks did not actually have to prove they had borrowed any money at that rate. They did not have to show receipts, bank statements, or transaction records. The entire system was based on an honor system. It was built on the assumption that prestigious, centuries-old financial institutions would never lie. Because of this trust, the world went crazy for LIBOR. It became the benchmark. If a bank in Miami wanted to lend money to a local business, they did not want to spend hours calculating a fair interest rate. They just said, "We will charge you the London rate, plus 2%. If a country in South America wanted to issue bonds to build a highway, they tied the payments to the London rate. If you bought a house with a variable rate mortgage, your monthly payment was directly linked to this single number calculated in London. This meant that if the London rate went up by even a tiny fraction of a percent, millions of ordinary people around the world suddenly had to pay more money for their homes, their cars, and their student debts. If the rate went down, those people paid less. With so much power resting on this one number, you would assume the people submitting it were under heavy security, watched by cameras and auditors. But they were not. The people typing these numbers into their screens were just mid-level employees, and they quickly realized something dangerous. They realized that they could make themselves and their friends incredibly rich just by nudging the number up or down by a fraction of a penny. To understand why they did this, we have to meet the traders. These were the high-energy, aggressive employees who made massive bets on the direction of the financial markets. They did not care about the long-term health of the bank. They only cared about their daily profit and loss statements, which determined their multi-million-dollar end-of-year bonuses. These traders had built massive portfolios of complex financial contracts that paid off based on where the London rate landed each day. If the rate was high on a Tuesday, the trader made millions. If it was low, they lost millions. One day, a clever trader looked over at the desk of the guy who submitted the bank's daily rate question. He realized there was no wall between them. They worked in the same building, drank at the same bars, and ate at the same restaurants. The trader walked over and asked a simple question. "Hey, when you submit our borrowing rate today, could you make it just a tiny bit lower than yesterday? It would really help my trades." The submitter looked at his screen. He knew that nobody was checking his math. He knew there were no receipts to show. He shrugged, typed in a slightly lower number, and clicked submit. Just like that, with a few keystrokes, the trader made a fortune. This brings us to our third twist. This manipulation was not a highly guarded, top-secret conspiracy. It was an open secret. It was casual. Traders from different, competing banks would get on online chat rooms and openly coordinate their lies. They did not talk like sophisticated financial masterminds. They talked like frat boys. One trader wrote to a submitter at a rival bank, saying, "If you keep the rate low today, I will buy you a bottle of Bollinger champagne." Another message read, "Dude, you are a superstar. I owe you a massive steak dinner for this." Sometimes the favors were even smaller. Submitters would alter the price of global money just because a colleague bought them a coffee, or simply because they wanted to be liked by the cool traders on the trading floor. While these bankers were celebrating their free steak dinners and cheap champagne, something terrible was happening to everyone else. Because the rate was being artificially manipulated, the game was rigged. If you had a savings account, the interest you earned was lower than it should have been. If you had a mortgage, you were often paying more than you should have. It was a silent tax levied on the entire planet, with the proceeds funneled directly into the pockets of a few dozen traders in London and New York. But then, the year 2008 arrived. The global financial crisis hit like a tidal wave. Suddenly, banks began to fail. Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. Bear Stearns collapsed. Nobody trusted anyone anymore. Because banks were terrified that other banks would go out of business overnight, they stopped lending to each other. If a bank did agree to lend money, they demanded a massive interest rate to cover the extreme risk. In the real world, the cost of borrowing money skyrocketed. It should have been the highest it had ever been in history. But on the computer screens in London, a miracle seemed to be happening. According to the daily rates submitted by the 16 banks, everything was perfectly fine. The borrowing rates remained incredibly low, stable, and calm. It looked like a serene, flat line on a heart monitor. This leads to our fourth twist. The regulators, the government watchdogs who were supposed to protect the public, noticed this flat line. They knew it was a lie. They knew that no bank was actually borrowing money at those low rates during the worst financial panic in a century. But instead of exposing the lie, the regulators actually encouraged it. During a panic, if a bank admits that it costs them a massive amount of money to borrow cash overnight, it sends a signal to the world. It tells investors and depositors that the bank is in deep trouble and that it might collapse tomorrow. This can trigger a bank run where panicked citizens rush to withdraw their cash, causing the bank to fail for real. To prevent this panic, the central banks whispered to the major commercial banks, "Keep your reported rates low. Do not let the public see how bad things really are." So, the banks lied to save themselves, and the regulators looked the other way because they wanted to keep the global financial system from collapsing. The lie was no longer just about greedy traders wanting steak dinners. It was now a matter of national security. But a lie that big cannot stay hidden forever. Eventually, the financial crisis settled down, but a few quiet investigators began to look at the data. One analyst at the Commodity Futures Trading Commission in America noticed something bizarre. He looked at the charts of the borrowing rates from 2007 and 2008. In any normal market, prices move up and down like a jagged mountain range. They react to news, to events, to human emotion. But the London rate charts looked like a straight highway through a flat desert. It was mathematically impossible. It was like looking at a heart rate monitor of a person running a marathon and seeing a perfectly straight, calm line. It meant the patient was either dead or the machine was broken. The investigators began to demand emails, phone records, and internal chat logs from the banks. What they found shocked them. They expected to find a complex, sophisticated web of high-level financial deceit. Instead, they found thousands of chat logs filled with blatant, casual cheating. They found traders openly bragging about how easy it was to manipulate the system. They found messages where submitters joked about how they would go to jail if anyone ever read their chats. The scale of the scam was breathtaking. It was the largest financial fraud in the history of the world, dwarfing any Ponzi scheme or corporate bankruptcy. And here is the final, most bitter twist. When the truth finally came out and the public demanded justice, the system protected its own. The major banks were fined billions of dollars. To an ordinary person, $1 billion fine sounds like a massive punishment. But to these global mega banks, it was just the cost of doing business. It was a minor expense paid out of their massive annual profits. And what about the people who actually did it? The CEOs of the banks claimed they had absolutely no idea what was happening on their trading floors. They kept their multi-million-dollar pensions and walked away clean. Only a tiny handful of low to mid-level traders were actually sent to prison. The most famous was a math genius named Tom Hayes. He was a brilliant but socially awkward trader who was incredibly good at tracking the movement of these rates. When he was caught, he did not deny what he did. In fact, he explained exactly how the system worked, assuming that because everyone above him knew about it and encouraged it, he was just doing his job. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison, later reduced to 11, while the senior executives who created the corrupt culture in the first place continued to enjoy their retirement on private yachts. He became the fall guy for an entire global industry. The London rate LIBOR is now officially dead. The world realized that you cannot build a global financial system on an honor system run by people who are incentivized to lie. It has been slowly replaced by new systems that are based on actual, real-world transactions that can be verified with receipts and data. But the scandal left a permanent scar on our understanding of modern finance. It showed us that the complex, intimidating world of global economics is not always run by hyper-rational mathematical models. Sometimes it is just a fragile illusion held together by a group of guys in suits typing fake numbers into a screen to win a free lunch.